Tables are an essential part of macOS, and today I'm going to show you how to implement them with SwiftUI. They have been part of SwiftUI since the very beginning, but thankfully since iOS 16 we can also use them on the iPhone and on the iPad, so I'm also showing you how they look like on these platforms. The data that I'm using is not that amazing today, but it's good to play with different kind of data. So how do we deal with dates or Boolean values? For some of the stuff it's a little bit more difficult. This is the table I'm going to work on. I have here some very simple data of my customer base. The special thing about tables is you have columns with a header section, and you can expand and decrease these columns. With macOS 14, they also made it possible to reorder these columns and to hide some of these columns. Other things that you might want to do is, for example, if I tab here, I want to select one row or many, or stuff like adding here the context menu, for example, to add an option for deleting. This is probably very common for any Mac app to have this kind of context menus. If I now compare this view on macOS with the iOS version, if you're on the larger screen, like on the iPad, there's enough space to show all these columns. Again, I have here my headers. One other thing that I implemented in this one is the possibility to sort. So you can sort by each of these columns, by the email, or if they're subscribed or not. So this is a Boolean value. We have a look at how to sort with different types of data. This is not the most straightforward thing. You can also see that there's a little bit of a different appearance between iOS and macOS. On macOS you have this alternating background colors. So we have a look at how to customize the appearance. The other thing on iOS especially is interesting because the user can't expand or change the width of these columns, but we can set this. So for this example, I actually made the last two columns more narrow. Table in horizontal compact mode will collapse and you will only see the first column. So I'm just going to use here slide over with another app. And now it's only the first column shown. You have options to check if you're in the compact mode to use a different view and to add more information. I'm going to show you how to show a different view, how to customize this, but only in compact mode, like here with the name of the user and the email address. So there's quite a lot of different parts we're going to touch on. And as you see, table is very useful on macOS and the larger screens. If you're on the smaller ones, you probably are fine with just lists or scroll views, lazy V-grids. This kind of stuff is more on iOS compared to macOS, where you want to have a lot of columns and dense information. Let's start implementing tables. And I did here prepare just a customer type, the data that I'm using. You can find a link to the project on the description, also on the blog post. I created a customer type. This has to be identifiable and hashable for the table for some of the operations. I added here a couple of properties just to test what is possible with tables. So we have a name string, email string, is subscribed bool. Then I have a enum status, this is subscription status, with 4 cases of trial, full, cancelled and expired. The money spent, this is an integer, and the creation date. I have here an initializer, and I added here a formatted date. This is just so I don't need to do the formatting in the SwiftUI views, although it got easier. And then I added here a static function examples, so we can easier generate some example data. This is just 3 customers with various numbers and creation dates and status. Now, if I would use this data in a list and I wanted to have a certain layout, I did here place it in an H stack, and this is really not the nicest solution for creating this layout. I added here a spacer and a fixed frame. You can use the new grid to get a more table-like layout, but this will be always static, so you don't have this nice header sections, the reordering. Especially if you're on Mac, definitely tables are great. Now let's change this to use a table, and I'm using the initializer with data in columns. So here we have to give a random access collection, similar to a list, just a collection. Random accessible, this is because it needs to access each of these elements really quickly by the ID. And then we have the table column content. Okay, so the data is here the same This is my customers. And then I have a closure for the columns. So we can start by adding a table column with title and value. So for example, I'm just going to remove the list. The title is the column title. So if I would want to use, like you see here currently, the name, this is again the header. And now I need to know what key path or what property of my type customer is supposed to show in this column. This is the name. And now the layout changes. You can recognize this as a table by these alternating background colors and by this header. Let's just add another column, again with title. This time I'm using the email and the value key path is email. Okay, let's try the last one that I had previously, which is the date. And now if I use the creation date, it gives me an error because the value type cannot be converted to contextual type string. So the thing is here, you saw I only had to specify the property, but in the view we see there's a text, and basically the system needs to know what text to show, what string to show for each of these properties. If I have a creation date, this is some special type, and the system just doesn't know how to display this. So there's some workarounds. For example, here I added a computed property formatted date of type string, where I use the calendar to compute a special creation date string. So you can use computed properties, and now it shows up nicely on this right with the special format that I had here. Or the more common way of using this is probably the title and content. So now I would use date. I do get here in this closure the identifiable data. This is for each of these rows. I get this data to decide what to show here. So this is the customer of this row. And now I can say the text customer creation date, and the style is date. This is then using this date style. As you see here, I can provide whatever I want to. This is the text. You can use a button, an image, or an icon. So let's try. And it adds these icons here. I guess usually you would use a text. Okay, going back, and I am, for this demo, going to stick with one of my dates. As you see, you have two options. Either you use the key path to specify what is shown, but this needs to be for properties of string type, or you use the closure where you get the data of each of these rows, and then you can show whatever text or a view that you want to have. Okay, now how do I work with different data? Maybe I want to add a static row at the end. Right now, it computes for each of these customers one row. There's a different initializer table. So this is with the rows at the end. And here you have to give table row content. This is a little bit different because you see it starts with of identifiable. So in this case, I need to say what type I use here. In your table, you can't have mixed types. It has to be either or, which kind of makes sense because you have a table header and you want to sort something, so it probably should be one type. You could use protocols as types too. So this is my customer.self. Then again, I have to give here the columns. This is similar as before. And now I have an extra rows. So this needs to be a table row. You can't give anything else back. And here you can either do static ones or use a for each to loop for all these elements. Nothing changed. I still use here the same data. It's just the access point that changed a little bit. But what you can do now is you can add another table row of any value that you want to have. I'm just going to create here a dummy abc at xyz.com and the current date. So this one is added at the last. You can also move this to the first one. So now it appears in front of everything else, or you can only use static ones. If you only have static ones, this is fine. You could, for example, also use maybe you have multiple arrays of data for different sections. You can also do this and add here multiple for each of these arrays. The main difference is that you have to specify here the type that you're working with. Next, I want to talk about how to make your tables interactable. So something like selecting or editing. If you want to make your table rows, the data in your table, selectable, we can use another property from the initializer, which is the selection. And you see it takes a binding to UUID. This is at state private var selection. This is my customer's ID, optional. And I start with no. So now I can use this as the binding here. I need to run this here in the live preview. So if I... this is the wrong window. Okay. This is the one from the content view. And this is the one from the preview, which you see here, Xcode preview. Now when I tap, it selects this here. I can actually select something. And this is the one that is stored in here. Now I only have here one customer I can select. You can also make this so the user can select multiple. And then I have to, and you select some multiple, it needs to be some collection, or in this case it's a set. A set because we don't really care about the order. And this has to be an empty array. No. Okay, now when I look at my preview, I can still select one, or if I hold the tab, you can select multiple of them. This is standard for most, like in Finder, you would also be able to select something like this. For example, if you select something, we could now use the new inspector for macOS 14. And then you would show this kind of detail that would be something like here, this kind of selection area. Another thing that might be interesting when you have something selected is actually being able to right click here. So I want to here add a context menu. And in order to add a context menu, we need to use the table with this table raw. If I go now to the previous example, where I had here for each, here I can add a context menu with menu items, also with a preview. This is not the same context menu because what we have to return in this closure is a table raw content. So this is, they had to add a special context menu. Okay, now I have a context menu and we can add a button. Usually something like delete buttons. So I'm going to use the role, action, and label. The role is destructive because this is a delete button. And then I add a label with title and system image. So this is delete and trash. Again, I need to find my preview window. And now when I here two finger click or right click, I get my context menu with this one button and this nice border, so I know which one is selected. The styling isn't really, it's just the default one. I need to test this for macOS 14, maybe they changed this. I have here one button. And I'm going to add two more, one edit button and one see details. I also added a divider. Now when I use this context menu, I have here three options with the divider. I only added this context menu to my dynamic customer data, not to the static one, which means that if you try to right click on the dummy row, this is not working. It's only added to the other ones. But maybe that's actually what you want. Maybe you want to have different context menus for different items in your list. Adding here this context menu is relatively easy. I'm still missing a little bit more styling with this red delete button, and also doesn't show my icon. Here, this trash icon. Maybe they're going to change this in the future. But definitely context menus are very important for tables on macOS. On iOS, this is a long press gesture. The next thing that you might want to interact with your tables is the way they're sorting their columns, the data in the table. And we can add a sorting mechanism where you can tap on the header to change the sorting. If I start again from this very basic example, one more property that you can use is the sort order. This is a binding to an array of sort descriptors or sorting. The reason why it's an array is because maybe you usually have multiple criteria. For example, if you sort by the date they are joined, like I have here, it looks like I have 3 times the same date. So how would I sort these? Then I could say primarily first sort by the date they are joined, the day they are joined, and then if it's the same, then use the name, so alphabetically. Now I need to have here state property for this binding. Sort orders. This is an array of key path, and in the beginning when I start this, I need to give one value, And you can say here the key path, that means which property do I want to compare, what do I want to use for this sorting, and in what order do I want to have, ascending or descending. For example, in the beginning, I use the customer's name, and the sort order is forward or reversed. And I can then use this in here. The new thing that changed is actually here the small arrow up, because the column that I'm sorting by has this arrow, and if it's up, it means forward. If you change this to reversed, it should go down, and now it moved downwards, and the sorting, it moved downwards. What you also saw is that my data actually did not change. This is because the system automatically, when you give it here to the table, it automatically handles how it shows the header. So here, every time you tap on one of these headers, this arrow moves, and it's also showing up or down for reverse or forward. But the actual data doesn't change. This is what we have to do. For our customers array, I need to modify every time my sort order changes. And we are going to use the onChange modifier. OnChange is working for any properties that are in a view. If this data would be in a view model, then I would use onReceive. OnChange of my sort order. This is the newer onChange where you get the old and new values. I only care about the new ones. But I'm going to probably use the old onChange for now. Okay. So now I want to modify my customers and sort them using this new value. This kind of sort mechanism that they added to mutable collections, or any random access collection also has this, like an array. This is only for iOS 15 and macOS 12. And now, when I tap here, I should actually change my sort order. So I can sort alphabetically by the email or the name. The sorting automatically works well with the ones where I use here a string value, but the one where I use a custom view, it does not know what to do with the sorting. And if you try to sort by joint add, it doesn't do anything. If I would, I told you earlier about the other way of doing this with a computed property, value formatted date. And now if I try to sort it by this, it works. I mean, I can sort it. It's just not maybe what you want to do. Probably not the most nicest way of doing this. Additionally, you get even more problems. If, for example, you use a Boolean value, and in this case, I'm going to use the value and content one. So this is subscribed. The value is subscribed, customer in, and now I can say, okay, I could also use a toggle or something, just using here yes or no texts for simplicity. If the user is subscribed, I show here text of yes. And now, because it doesn't know how to deal with these key path comparators, it gives me the arrow reference initializer on table column requires that customer inherits from NS object. I don't want to do any NS object stuff because I don't want to go for objects. So this is not the way to go. Similar as I had here with this formatted date. This is a solution I saw in one of the WWDC presentations. I added another computed property. Formatted is subscribed, and here I just use a subscribed text or not subscribed. Now I use this property, okay, and in the last column I have now the text that you just saw. And let's try if the sorting works. So now I can sort by these two properties. If you don't like the text, you can again use the customer in and then show a special text, yes or no. And I have now here this yes or no text. You could also show a toggle or whatever you want to. Yeah, toggle wouldn't, actually it's not a toggleable toggle because I don't have here a binding for this customer. So a little bit of a complication of what to use with these tables. Okay, then the last for the sorting, table column, was here this comparator is subscribed. But this only works again for formatted values. So it would help you, for example, if you want to change the way these strings are sorted. It's not the most flexible API in some cases, but as you see, you can create two different properties. One that you compute from the other one for this sorting, and then the main one that you use for showing actually in this view for this rows column. The other thing that most likely you want to do with tables is filtering. I'm not going to go too much into detail for this. So for example, two things you might want to do is searching for certain texts. So you need to have a state. I'm not doing everything, I'm just going to hint the strategy. State private var search text. This is a string and it's empty. Then you can use the searchable modifier with a binding to this search text. With the preview, this is always a little bit tricky, so let's run this. Now I have my little window and here's the search text field. And from this text input, I don't do it anything right now. This text input I then need to use to filter here my data. So for example, you would have a var filtered customers. This is an array of customer. And if I don't have anything in my search text fields count, for example, if I only added here maybe 2 letters, I'm just returning my normal customers array. And else I'm going to use this to filter this customers array and to say if the name contains my search text. And then I'm using this property, this array in my table. There's a lot of things you can do with the searching. I did it the other way around. I needs to be, if I have less than in my search text field, then I show this. Okay, now initially I show all of them and now I can type. And I have to use here capital John because I didn't make this case insensitive. If you want to do this, you can use here lowercase for both of them. So I'm making everything lowercase so it's easier to compare. And now I can also use lowercase John. You can also use something like tokens in the search text field or search scopes. I will make another video about this. You can check this out to see all these cool filtering options. The next topic I want to talk about is how this table looks on iOS. So previously, table was only available for macOS. Just going to jump to the definition. But with iOS 16, you can now use this also for the iPhone and the iPad. It will look different on the iPhone because it's in compact mode. It only shows the first column and it doesn't actually show the header. It's pretty much like a list. Here I did use my searchable and my toolbar item, which you don't see. This is because on the iPhone, you need to be in a navigation view, navigation stack, navigation split view. Navigation stack. You can now pick whatever navigation you want. I'm just going to move this in there. Okay, now you have here the search text field. This is still working on the iPad. I'm actually going to use a navigation split view. You will see in a minute why. It just helps me to demo something a little bit quicker. This is a compact table example view, and in this case I use a navigation split view with a sidebar in detail. I am going to use, you cannot pick any of these views, maybe I'll use the content view for both the master and detail. Okay, so I'm running this now in the simulator because in the preview I had some issues. Sometimes it doesn't show up properly. Okay, I'm going for whole landscape mode. So we see both the master and detail. So the master here, this is on a very narrow column, similar to compact horizontal size class. That's why it uses only, like on the iPhone that I showed you, the first column, which is the name column. There's no title. And then for my detail, it has enough space and we see these 3 columns. This is, I think, the view that doesn't have sorting enabled. Maybe I used the one with sorting. Okay, I need to replace this and run again. Okay. Now, it also works with the sorting. So you see here on my name, I can tab and I can resort this. One issue that we see now, especially here on the iPad, is that I do have all 3 of my columns are the same size, the same width per default, and I can't resize this. On the Mac, you can actually resize this, trying the same thing here. And here you can hover over these columns and resize them. Maybe I want to make my email column larger than my subscribed column and my join add column. And what you can do with this with these columns here, you can actually add something, a frame modifier, a width of 100. And as you see, this does not work because again, you are working here with special types. So this is not a view, it's a table column. So for all the customizations, like you saw with these rows, it's not a normal view modifiers, it's special ones. So in this case, it's width. You can either say one fixed width or again, minimum of, let's say, 50, ideal is 100, and maximum is 150. Let's add the same to my subscribed. So now these two, I can't adjust too much. If I now open this and try to make these two columns larger, it doesn't work. And there's a limit to these. This especially looks better now on the iPad, where I made the last two columns smaller. And I think in this case, it actually used the ideal ones. I can't do much about you don't really have a lot of control about the layout over these items. As you see, they're always leading aligned. I saw some tricks to change this, which I don't really like. Unfortunately, there's no access point. I would have expected here a column and then another property of alignment, but we don't have this. Okay. Now you saw the limits of this customization of each of these layouts. The question is, what do you do for compact mode if you have only the first column shown? How do we adjust for compact for smaller screen sizes now that we can use tables on iOS? And one strategy was suggested in the WWDC presentation, where we change the way these columns are shown, what is the content of these columns, depending on if you're in compact mode or not. And what you can use is the environment property for horizontal size class, private var horizon size class. The problem with this is that I can't use this property for macOS. They changed this, I think for macOS 14 you can now use this directly. For the lower versions you need to adjust. So, because this is an environment property, I cannot easily write conditional code. So the trick is to start with if OS is iOS, then I have this property, #end if. Now I want to use it somewhere in my views, and on macOS we won't have this property. So the workaround is to add an else case with a property that we can declare ourselves. So that is private let is compact false. So I declare this property one time for macOS and one time as a computed for iOS. And now I can say horizontal size class is compact. Then if this is compact, then it is compact, that's the more property. And for macOS it always says it's not. Now I need to, when I want to use this table, I need to actually add here a table. Okay, I have here again this 3 columns example. And I'm going to change this. I need to here conditionally say change these cells for this first column. So you saw me earlier using the one where table comment with value and content. So this is name, still the name property. I'm using this so it knows how to sort this again. And now you can use the customer here. Per default, I can use the name. I could use now the same customer's name. Now my views didn't actually change, but I have the possibility to modify this cell. So let's say I want to have here vstack. And in case I am in compact mode, is compact. Then I show the text with the customer's email. To make this a little bit different, we use a foreground color of secondary. And then I change the alignment to leading. Now this is nice in compact mode. And I check how this looks on macOS. I still have all 3 of my columns. So here I adjust the first cell. For example, if you want to use a list, if you would have used a list anyway, this would be the same outcome. However, if you want to use a completely something different, like a scroll view with a grid layout, for example, we would need to conditionally check if we should show a table or the scroll view. So I have here the same data that as my starting point. I have this table. I still need to know if I'm in compact mode or not. Now here we can say if is compact. This is for the iOS versions on the iPhone, and otherwise, if I'm not in compact, I show the normal table. So let's say I would use here a scroll view with a lazy V stack. I'm just using the V stack right now, showing my customer, and then here I again can show whatever view I want. I'm using here the same V stack, additionally with some alignment and spacing, layout adjustments. Now I can use whatever view you want to have. For the compact modes, maybe you want to show a completely different cell, different font sizes, maybe some images. Then on the Mac or on the iPad in regular size classes, where we can really see the full table view. Similar to list styling, you can also do some styling modifications for tables. So for example, if I want to modify this table, after the table I can add a table styling modifier. And we can use a inset border. Now it's inset, so there's more space on the leading and trailing edges. They changed something for iOS 14. Now you have, as you see, I have this alternating background colors. And you can actually override this behavior by saying false. So don't show these alternating background colors, and now it's always the same color. This is now replaced with macOS 14. And in this case, they are saying, yeah, it's soft deprecate, you can still use this. And we have a new bordered style with the alternating backgrounds view modifier. So this should be something like alternating backgrounds behavior disabled. So this would be then the new version, macOS 14. I didn't install macOS 14 yet, so I can't show you this. So you can either use bordered, inset, with or without the background colors. I already talked about how to change the width of these columns. This was with the width modifier to each of these table columns, with a minimum, ideal, and maximum. So you can decide how to show them and how the user can stretch them, expand them. And then maybe more as a last gimmick, you can also add some of the scroll behavior. For example, you can say scroll disabled too. And now we shouldn't be able to scroll anymore. I need to make my window small enough. And now if I try to scroll, I can't. If I make this here to false, going to my preview window, make this again smaller. And now you see here this indicator, the scroll indicator, and I can actually scroll. Similar to scroll content background visibility to hidden. And then if you want to change the background color, background color dot pink. You can override the background color, not the header background color. You can use this scroll disabled and content background for scroll views, anything that is scrollable. Text editor, multi-text field, lists, scroll views, and here tables. I already touched on some parts that changed for macOS 14, or that will change for macOS 14. I'm using here a beta version. So I haven't tested much of these, but I still want to show you some of the newer stuff that you can now do. So for example, you can change the column customization, and which helps you to reorder your columns. So you can switch up. The user could then dynamically change the order of the columns. They could also then hide the whole column. What you need to use is then the new initializer with column customization. And you need to provide a customization ID for each of these table columns. This looks like a very nice feature. Then you can use now disclosure groups. So you can actually have a whole section, like here on the iPhone. You can add a disclosure group in the table rows. Disclosure table row. As I said, this is not a normal view, it's something special. That's why they have to always add this kind of special views, which gives you then the possibility to have here sections, collapsible sections. On the iPad, this looks like this. So again, this is the example from the WWDC presentation. You have here then these collapsible sections. If you work with nested views, this is pretty much the same. Quite a nice addition. The newer changes to the appearance are, one of them I already showed you with this alternating raw backgrounds disabled modifier. But you can also hide the table columns headers. This is anyway not shown on the iPhone or in compact mode, but on the Mac you can then hide the headers. To wrap up, tables are much more at home on the Mac, but since iOS 16 you can also use them on iOS, especially on the iPad in full screen. This is quite an interesting layout. I showed you how to add these table columns, how to prepare your data, And we talked about stuff like selecting tables, being able to sort tables with the sort order, a little bit of how you can filter your data with, for example, search text fields. If you want to see more about searching, I would recommend you another tutorial of mine, which is all about the searching stuff. So you will learn about searchable and search tokens and search suggestions. There's quite a lot of things you can actually do with searching, which is especially interesting if you have a more complex data going on, a lot of filtering stuff. Then I talked a little bit about how to adjust. Then I talked a little bit about how to use tables on iOS, how to adjust for different screen sizes, especially on compact. So we either show different cell or whole different view. And I also talked a little bit about how to change the appearance of these tables. They're pretty fixed, which is normal because it's one system UI element that you probably want to have the same styling as the other ones. For example, this alternating background color, it just makes it easier to skim through large lists. Thank you for watching. Like and subscribe. Until next time, happy coding.